Frank?
How supportive is the U.S. Jewish community with your particular position?
Um, I'll try that. I don't think, I'm not an expert on that, but I'll say for that, and then I'll ask for other people if they want to chime in on this. I think that the Jewish community is more split now than I've ever known it to be. And certainly the majority of the Jewish community is staying with the mainstream line of supporting Israel in the traditional way of supporting Israel. But there is now Peace Now has been, it's a largely, I believe, Jewish group, very, very much for negotiations challenging the traditional, that certainly would challenge Netanyahu right now. There's also, in the recent years, a new group called J Street, which is actually trying very, very hard to reach politicians in Congress and to mobilize the community. It's working very hard among the younger generation of Jewish population, many of whom have become very almost disassociated on this topic. So I think we're seeing some real thinking and split within the Jewish community. But I think, and this does go to how Harvey joined our group, the Jewish community is very important, but just and perhaps in numbers more important, the traditional evangelical Christian group here. They outnumber the Jewish community many, many times over, and I think it's fair to say they too are somewhat more split now. So I think people are really seeing that there are real issues for. If you're Jewish and worried about, for example, the security of the state of Israel, really a negotiated two-state solution is a far stronger insurance than any military could possibly be. Anybody want to add to that? Henry?
Just to add to that, I think what we see, certainly our report, the consensus part of the report, the policy recommendations, bear out what has just been said. The recommendations urge the U.S. to take a stronger position to bring about some agreement between the Palestinians and Israel. And the official U.S. position has long been a two-state solution. In that sense, our report is totally conventional. All the right-thinking people, one can say, want a two-state solution. And this is true of almost all European countries and many, many others. We are saying you must be tougher. For example, there is a Security Council resolution coming up that would criticize Israel for action it has taken in continuing to build settlements that's blocked further negotiations for the moment, and not to have another freeze, just to let negotiations continue. We have vetoed, that is, we, the United States, many of these resolutions critical of Israel that have otherwise captured a great majority, and sometimes all other members of the Security Council, including the other permanent members. So we're suggesting pressures can be put in many ways. I think our president could make a speech to the American people as he made to Cairo, or perhaps go to Jerusalem and make a speech there as he went to Cairo, and make clear that we are never doubt, I don't think Americans basically do doubt, that this country is strongly supportive of the security and ongoing survival of Israel as a Jewish majority state. But that doesn't stop it from taking a friend with whom there are many military and intelligence relationships and other emotional ones over the decades, and saying, if you are a friend, then you should listen to us, because we're speaking to you as one speaks to a friend. We're telling you you're moving in a very bad direction that is not simply against your immediate interest. In the long run, it may threaten your survival. So I think this is what many, I think, people in the Jewish community are now stating, certainly not a majority, is precisely that. The commitment to Israel's security continues, but we take a much tougher position when it comes to things like negotiate on the settlements, yield on the settlements, yield on the vital, indefensible issues from, I think, our point of view, in order to achieve a two-state solution.
There are always more questions. Can we just take, for the final round, 3 at once, And 1, 2, 3. And we'll see if we can handle them. We'll only go over by a few minutes. Please.
Could, if the treaty in any way, shape, or form, if we were to take Jerusalem out of the hands of both parties and give it rights similar to that of Vatican City?
Okay. We know who's going to answer that one. Please, you're way in the back.
What do you think might happen? What do you think would be the eventual progression and end game, so to speak, if a two-state solution, a concrete two-state solution, did not come to fruition? Would we continue to just see low-level violence and instability, or would it sort of boil over into another intifada or an all-out war in the future, coming decades or centuries even?
Okay, and
I was just asking somewhat in connection to that, if you could define a little bit more specifically what you mean by peace, since peace historically has not necessarily precluded certain types of violence or coercion or exploitation.
okay. Harvey, you wanna handle Jerusalem?
Could I also add to your answer?
Please, I knew you'd want to.
Just 2 years ago, 211 American rabbis put a full page ad in the New York Times saying, "We support a shared Jerusalem," as part of an overall settlement, which says something about the sentiment in the American Jewish community. What happens to Jerusalem, I think, is very key. I don't think that the entire city of Jerusalem should be made into an international, what the original idea was a corpus separatum, different in international law, different from Palestine and Israel. However, I think there is a possibility that the tiny little segment I referred to in the middle of Jerusalem, the old city, the old walled city, which is the principal location of these holy sites, could be under some kind of negotiated international and interfaith commission, agreed upon by all the parties. That might work out very well.
Alan Berger has agreed to answer if no two-state solution.
Yeah, a couple of points to that. First of all, you would have simply a projection of the situation that's existed for some time now, and a succession of Israeli prime ministers, all who came from the right wing, have said that if we go on in this way, eventually the demographic changes will mean that we are a
Ellen, we're going to put the demographics up again. Go ahead.
minority Jewish Israeli population ruling over a Palestinian majority. It'll be an apartheid state. We can't do that. It'll mean the end of Israel as a democracy and/or as a Jewish majority state. But then there's also the question of what will happen regionally. And I think what you've seen with the uprising in Egypt recently is that no strategic situation remains the same forever. And it appears to be changing now, even if this change is not a complete change in Egypt. Something is happening in the region. You have these young populations. They're not going to stand for the same regimes. And when those regimes change that have had working relations with Israel and alliances with Israel and peace treaties, Israel's security is not going to be what it is now. And therefore, there is, if you look out into the future, I would think that any Israeli leader who's thinking about the future would think that he has to act now rather than wait.
Anybody want to answer what do we mean by peace? Thank you.
Well, what I would say is that we mean much more than the end of hostilities and the end of military threats and threats of violence and so on. I think that real peace, what we have to keep in mind is that small land, Israel-Palestine, requires that the population in it have decent relationships with one another. You cannot have a situation in which there is a constant threat of violence and so on. So peace, as I see it, for peace between Israel and Palestine requires the establishment of cooperative relationships at all levels, particularly in the economic sphere. It's very, very difficult to maintain a kind of segregation economically with respect to public health, with respect to environmental issues, with respect to tourism, etc. We need a situation, a peace, in which there would be relatively open borders, in which people from the two parts, people from Israel and from Palestine, would feel free to cross the border, and, for example, for Palestinians to go to Jaffa, which is a greatly admired city in Palestinian poetry and so on, for Jews to go to Hebron in order to pray, for Israeli Jews to pray at Abraham's tomb, etc. So I think peace, as I see it, requires a relationship between the two countries in which there are open borders, there are cooperative relationships, and in which both peoples and their governments think in terms of the welfare of the entire country rather than only in terms of the welfare of their independent states, because the welfare of each state depends on the welfare of the entire country.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory, and I just want to thank you all for coming and the conversation. I just want to say, I hope we convinced you that a two-state solution is the way to go, and you can all write your letters to the president. And if you don't have all the lines, please come over to the Fenway Room and join us, and we can discuss it further. Thank you.
Peace must mean both shall.